Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of our podcast, A While Back. Today, we have a very special guest. He's Dad's grandson, my nephew. His name is Jared. And Jared is going to offer us what we've been getting from all the grandchildren, and we're kind of slowly but surely going through each of them to appear here on camera. But Jared's going to give us a third generational perspective of what he's heard from Grandpa, but more importantly, he's going to answer questions that we have for him regarding where he is in life, what his future goals are, and what's going to really be nice is to find out how married life is treating Jared. Because Jared's been married over a little bit over a year now, and we're going to ask him questions about that. And those are going to be more interesting to me than just about everything else. So I'm looking forward to those. But let's get started. So today, this episode is titled The Wolf of Wall Street. And the reason it's titled that is because Jared is in the finance business, and he's been in business for quite some time, and he loves the financial side of it. And I thought that was a fitting title for this particular episode. And for Jared, we're going to have him introduce himself here in a minute, but I can speak to certain things about Jared just from my own experience because Marty, myself, Zachary, and Kyle, we were lucky enough to have had Jared live with us for 4 years while he was going to college. And he's an exceptional young man. He has turned out to be a great man, and he's turned out to be a great husband. So we're very proud of Jared. Now, let's get started. So, Jared, go on and introduce yourself. From a millennial perspective, we have some pretty good questions for you.
That sounds good. Well, let the record show. My name is Jarrett. Uncle Bert was kind of saying Jared, but it's Jarrett with a T.
I apologize. Please, by all means, go on.
But yeah, I live in Corpus Christi with my wife. I moved to Corpus when I turned 18 or around 18-ish after high school to go to college there. I have cousins as well, Zach and Alec, that were both going to A&M Corpus. And yeah, I moved there. I moved in with Uncle Bert. It was a fun time, great time. That definitely was like interesting in of itself. Obviously, changing and going into somebody else's family, that's, I would say, it's different, right? You're living with your own family, and you go and live with somebody else's. That's an interesting aspect in and of itself.
Absolutely.
As far as like even growing up. But yeah, I mean, I stayed in Corpus. I graduated my undergrad in Corpus. And then I actually met my wife in Corpus after I started working. I started working at a car dealership. And then I met my wife. Things took off at a fast pace. And then, I went back to college and got my MBA. And then now I'm still living in Corpus, and now I'm working in Corpus as well.
Okay, great. All right. Well, you kind of took care of question 2, but hold on. We're going to go back to your academic career. But so what is your wife's name? Where is she from?
So my wife's name is Mahogany, and she's from Bolivia, which is in South America.
And how long have y'all been married?
We've been married for a little over a year. Yeah.
Outstanding. All right, great. So as we alluded to, I believe it was one of our episodes, probably episode 4, when we had talked to Mom and Dad about marriage. Jared has the youngest marriage in the family so far. Yeah. So there's Mom and Dad who are going to be celebrating 53 years. There's myself and my wife, Marty, at 27. And then we have them all the way down to newlyweds, practically, in Jared and his wife, Mahogany, who have been married a little over a year. And as we said before, we also have Alec and Morgan that are going to be coming in October. So we continuously, even with the millennial generation, continuously have marriages coming up through the family, which is outstanding. And later on in the questions, we're going to ask Jared to give us a little bit of advice from being a newlywed as to how you can make a marriage stronger and make it survive much longer than a year. But let's go on to question number 2. So Jared, you briefly alluded to it, your academic achievements.
Yeah.
But let's get started. So the minute that you went to college, what were you majoring in? How did you pursue your goals to get to your bachelor's? Mm-hmm. And more importantly, how did you achieve your goals to get your master's? And what field were they in?
So originally, I started off as a criminal justice major. I actually wanted to be a lawyer. And during that time, in the beginning of college, you kind of take the classes that aren't very much into your field. You're taking, Texas history, Western literature, old like literature classes.
Right.
So you don't really get into, I would say, your topic of your field of study until later on in your college. Um, However, though, I would say there was a key point into that time where I've transitioned out of the criminal justice. So I would say one aspect was I always played baseball growing up my whole life. And during that time, I actually, when I was living with you, uh, I went and I tried out. They had a walk on for the TEMUCC baseball. And my idea was always to play baseball after high school. And I always wanted to play. However, I would say seriousness of me taking it seriously, in the summertime, typically if you're going to go play for a D1 college, you're going to be working out pretty heavily. You're going to be eating and dieting, right?
Right.
But I thought, I could do it and just walk on, right? And go try out. Well, I go there that day, and everybody has their cleats on, everything, suited up. And we start getting into like a couple of the workouts. And I start looking around and I'm like, dang, these guys are good. I can tell they've been doing this for a while. And as for me, I've played baseball my whole life, so the competitive aspect has always been there,
Right.
I always like the competition, and that kind of fuels me. So these guys were good. They were no joke. And at that point, I kind of realized, all right, this probably isn't going to happen continuing on. So I wanted, and I don't know why, but I do remember being in the university center and seeing something on business on TV. And this was like maybe a couple weeks after it. But I was like, oh, dang, I think business is cool because like there's more or less like a competition to it. You can see numbers. Baseball is a numbers game.
Mm-hmm.
You can see that. And in a sense, businesses too, you can see numbers. So I thought that's kind of like my next competitive thing that I can more or less like get into,
Now, when did you decide to switch your major from criminal justice, and what did you switch it to?
So I was taking criminal justice classes, well, some, because you don't get much into it, like I said. So I was taking like Texas history, Western literature, like all these classes that, you don't necessarily even use as of today, sometimes. And the grades that I got, I wasn't that much, I've always not been too involved or intense in school and getting amazing grades, right? I never had A's, A pluses. However, like during that time, I went to go talk to a counselor, or a criminal justice counselor. And during that time, she was asking me like, what did I want to do after college and all that kind of good stuff. And I asked her for her opinion on what she thought, and she said, I had to have like pretty much 4.0 GPA to get into a competitive enough school, in a sense, to go to a good criminal law school, which I didn't have. So that's
But you still had really good grades.
Of
so
course.
Don't shortcut.
Of course. I still had good grades. But I wasn't the leading one in the class. I wasn't 1 to 10, and that's pretty much what you said. You had to be either the top 5 or the top 10 in the whole, more or less like university in a sense. But yeah, that's when I transitioned into business. I started actually talking with another counselor at the university, and she really sat down with me and asked me, "Hey, well, let's you answer these questions. I have a set of questions. You answer them to the best of your ability, and it's going to pretty much tell us what are you going to like the most, essentially."
Really?
What thing, yeah.
Oh, good.
So finance was one of the main ones. It came down to accounting or finance. And I chose finance because it's more of the future, what happens in the future versus the present and the past.
Oh, good. All right.
So, yeah. But I those are like the main things that like I would say more or less like pivotal points in the whole like career that I can remember,
That's great. So that was you ended up getting your bachelor's in business finance or in business management?
Yeah, the undergrad was finance.
Finance, okay.
Yeah.
Now, more importantly, let's go on to your master's. Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
So what did you do to get your master's? What was it in?
So for my master's, I graduated, just to kind of give like a backstory. I graduated, and then I was doing internships with like local businesses. While I was even living with you, I worked at a number of different places, Academy, Marshalls, and they all give you great learning experiences in life.
Right.
Along with a lot of learning experiences
Exactly.
living with you as well.
Right, exactly.
But, I mean, you don't really notice them until you continue to grow older,
Absolutely,
obviously.
right.
But yeah, after college, I graduated, and then I started to work as an intern with a local car dealership.
Mm-hmm.
And I told them that, I wanted to do finance and whatnot. And you kind of have to progress as like any car dealership, your finance area is your most profitable area in any car dealership. So just hopping into the car business and then to the most profitable aspect of it, they're going to hold off like, this is a young guy,
Because of your age. That makes sense.
Of course. Right. And let's train him, right and whatnot. But yeah, I worked for there, and then it gets old after a while. I didn't necessarily like some of the ways or the aspects that they had. But then during that time, I became good friends with one of my friends he's actually my best friend. I met him through the car dealership that I worked at. And then he actually introduced me to my wife while we were out one day or one night per se.
Outstanding.
And then after I met my wife, I started hanging around with different group of people, more or less. Right. And they all had their masters, or not all of them, but most of them had their masters.
Right.
So, my wife has her masters too. She got her masters or was studying her masters during that time. So, I mean, I'm a competitive person. If the other people,
yours,
I had to go back for it.
Absolutely.
Granted, I had help for sure for my wife. But yeah, that's how I got my master's.
All right.
That's what led me to get my master's.
That's outstanding. That is great. Now, based on, and I'm just talking about your career going forward and family.
Yeah.
So where do you see yourself, and of course we got to include Mahogany in that.
Yeah.
Where do you see both yourself and Mahogany going forward next 5-10 years from now?
Next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah.
I mean, I think we'll definitely have kids. We're not too sure how many kids. But obviously Mahogany lives and her family is in Bolivia. So what we do know for sure is that during the next years or so, we're going to be going back and forth from the United States to Bolivia.
Right.
So that's what's for sure.
Right. Well,
whatever happens or wherever life takes us, more or less.
And that's the way you treat it. That's exactly the way you treat it right there. Whatever happens, happens.
Yeah.
If it's one child, bravo. If it's 6, even better.
Yeah.
So you got to make sure that it's whatever happens is going to happen. You roll with it, and you love it, and you enjoy it.
Yeah.
And that's the best way to handle it. So, Dad, do you have any question for Jared before we go on to the next couple of questions?
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to say is, this is a generation deal.
Absolutely.
And what I wanted to bring up was, and this is probably not for Jared, but just for both of y'all, is when I was a little kid, growing up on the farm, we had much different bring up and games than y'all had. We had games like playing marbles, where you make holes in the ground.
Oh, yeah.
You shoot marbles and knock each other off. We had a hopscotch, and I don't know if y'all know what hopscotch is.
Yeah, as a matter of fact.
Okay. And then we also played ante over, which we threw the ball over the roof of the barn or the house, and we might have 2-3 people on each side, and the one that would catch the least was a loser. And then another thing we did, which y'all probably never did, was take car tires. And we had a road about 1,500 feet from the house. And we'd race each one would race with a car tire down the road all the way to the gate and come back. And that's the games we more or less play.
So your games were strictly what you had laying around in the yard.
Right. Also, another game was the girls' game was Ring Around the Rosies.
Oh.
And I played that with them too.
Well, I'm going to be honest. I'm glad you said that, but what's disturbing is actually thinking of Grandpa playing hopscotch. that kind of bothers me right now.
Well,
But,
I wouldn't do that today.
oh, okay.
Not
Thank
today.
you. Thank you. Okay.
But I was athletic in my young years.
All
I
right,
was in
good.
my young years.
Yeah, but still, I just can't see you playing hopscotch
No, but
at any age.
competition in our family is for sure. I would
Absolutely,
say,
it is.
obviously.
It is. It is.
So, reason I brought that up, what was your growing up? What was your game? So then you tell me what yours, how y'all were brought up.
Oh, we did out here. It was just strictly, well, for me, it was strictly hunting anything and everything that had legs or wings, and that's what it was for me. We would play baseball every once in a while.
Right.
We were constantly throwing the football too. But as you remember, on weekends we would have volleyball.
Oh, that's
and we
true.
had the net set up
That's-
right over
that's
there,
true.
and we
Played
had
a lot
all
of
our buddies
volleyball.
out. And it was like
Right.
5-on-5 volleyball, and that was
Ooh,
a ton of
that's
fun.
true.
on weekends.
That was a ton of
But
fun.
let's not get sidetracked now, Ron. So, Jared, let me ask you another question so I can keep these going. Now, you grew up in Victoria and you did move to Corpus. What was the biggest change that you can remember moving from a smallish, really small town to a smaller type town, but just a little bit less than 300,000?
The biggest change, I would say, is, I mean, you're getting out of your comfort zone, more or less, right? So in anything, I think you get comfortable in a sense when you get comfortable, right? But going and living with another family, obviously, that is different of itself. And that has, like, different challenges and whatnot that I think, even for myself, right, you have to kind of integrate into it, which is interesting.
Yeah.
And obviously going to school at the same time as well is a big pressure for, I think, any young individual, and getting out there and getting out of their comfort zone.
Especially.
But as far as even too, living with you, looking back, there's no greater, I guess, thing that you could have done for me. And as far as helping out me and, my career and whatnot in my life.
You know good and well that was the pleasure of both Aunt Marty and I. We would have done it in a heartbeat. It didn't matter who it was, but you did a phenomenal job around the house, and we loved it.
But I think the hardest change for you, Jared, was washing that car every weekend. You weren't used to that.
No, let me get into it. We would have to, if let's say we were watching TV and Uncle Bert came home, Uncle Bert would make us go outside and pick the weeds out of his lawn. Now my Uncle Brian, he has the greenest grass you'll ever see, but my Uncle Bert, he has a lot of weeds.
My lawn is manicured by God. So when it rains, my lawn is green. When it doesn't, I don't water, nothing of the sort. But yes, Jared is right. He did have to follow certain rules, and he was really good at following the chores that we had for him, and he was a pleasure to have around. So,
Yeah.
all right. So now, as far as you, and you kind of alluded to it earlier, and when you said your best friend, was that Sergio?
No, Peyton.
Peyton. Okay, so I know Peyton too.
Yeah.
All right. So Peyton introduced you to Mahogany at the time.
Correct.
All right, great. So when he introduced you to Mahogany and you first met Mahogany, and I asked Mom and Dad the same question, what was your first impression of Mahogany when you met her for the very first time?
I mean, I definitely thought she was beautiful. So, and even too, to give a backstory, we were at a Latin bar club-ish area, and it was at night, and I thought she was beautiful. And obviously, I was out of my comfort zone, right? I was in a Latin bar / club. I didn't know how to dance and everything like that.
But you were with a beautiful young lady, so
But of
you
course,
were
that's all that matters.
Exactly, right.
That's all that mattered. But we hit it off. We started talking. We danced a little bit. She showed me how to dance. And I thought, what a wonderful, beautiful, genuine person.
Absolutely, she is.
So, yeah, I mean, pretty much haven't looked back since then.
There you go. And you better not look back. You better just keep going forward. So now, this is an important one. This is where I want you to kind of elaborate, because from the millennial point of view, we know things are different and completely different than when I grew up and completely different from when Grandpa grew up.
Yeah.
But what advice would you give to newlyweds or people that are now going to be getting married for the millennial generation or for Generation Z? What advice would you give them to keep their marriages strong and to help them survive for the long haul?
So I personally think, and this I think is a pretty simple one for me to answer, because everybody has their own opinion. I feel like, today everybody has their own opinion and they want to voice their own opinion. But when you get into an argument, right?
Right.
Which there's going to be arguments that you have, being able to keep your cool and not say anything back in a heated moment, I would say is like a major thing. Because obviously you can't take back what you say.
Right.
But I would say keeping your cool and not saying stuff in the moment, in a sense.
Exactly.
Because a day or a couple hours from now, you're gonna it's gonna change for sure.
Because what's going to happen is going to be brought up again, whether by you or by Mahogany,
Yes,
correct?
yes.
So Grandpa had some really good advice when we did his, and we had talked about marriage. Grandpa had one very important thing. He said, never go to bed angry. So maybe that's something that if ever, and God willing, it probably won't, let's hope. But if it does ever come into play, remember that one sentence. Never go to bed angry. I think that's a very good point that
But
Grandpa
I
brought.
also did say, you got to have faith in God. God comes first, but
Absolutely.
in all marriages, and you
Absolutely.
don't have God.
Well, and I think too, even to elaborate, even when you know you're wrong, or even let's say you know you're right.
wrong, you be quiet.
You know you're right.
You're right. What do you do?
You still say you're wrong. I mean, you're wrong regardless.
The reason Grandpa and I find that so funny is because of the fact 27 years, 53 years. But go on, Jared. No,
Go ahead.
Yeah, no matter what it is. I mean, it doesn't matter who's right or who's wrong. At the end of the day, I'm gonna be the one that says, you know what, let's get past it.
Absolutely. It's much better to sail on calmer waters than on rough waters, right? All right. So I'm glad you gave that little piece of advice about being married now, because you're looking at it from essentially still a newlywed position. But that's great, and I'm glad Grandpa was here to tell you those things too.
Which, growing up too in a good family, I think I get a lot of these growing up. Being around Grandpa and Grandma a lot, and obviously being around you and my uncles, my other uncles, Uncle Steve and Uncle Brian, you realize that.
Absolutely, because
your mom.
And my mom, yes.
I
Exactly.
mean, your mom is one of the most religious people I've ever met,
Yeah.
short of being in the convent. Yes, she is extremely religious lady. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
And she's done the best possible thing she could have done for all three of y'all, was making sure y'all stayed on a straight and narrow, and you had a really strong Catholic faith.
For sure.
And your mom did a phenomenal job with that. And you know it too. That's why you said that. That's great. All right. So this was one I know that you mentioned Peyton, and I know Sergio, and Sergio's a great guy. I get a kick out of Sergio.
Yeah.
But now that you're married, do you get to stay in touch with your old friends a lot? Or is it just more or less couple friends that you and Mahogany hang out with?
I guess couple friends. More or less, we meet people along the way. My older friends, more or less, let's say from high school, I don't necessarily keep up with them, or the ones that I played baseball with. Obviously, I have them on social medias and whatnot. But I feel as though any day I could pick up and say, hey, man, what's going on, And it's not, and you have an idea of where they're at in life, what's going on. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. And the reason I asked that question is because I put it back into my own perspective. And Dad, you may have a couple too, but I've got a buddy that I've known since 8th grade, and we're still best buddies. You guys practically call him your uncle. So you know what I'm talking about. But there's nothing he wouldn't do for us and for each of you grandkids as well, as y'all are well aware. So it's important to keep those buddies by your side no matter what.
Yeah.
And Dad, did you have anything you want to say about that?
I'm talking about friends and buddies. I called one that I graduated with in 63.
Wow.
Just the other day, and we had a good laugh. In fact, I talked to two of them. We laughed about all the good times we had. So, yes, it's important to have good friends.
Throwing those baseballs over the house and throwing marbles in the dirt.
Throwing marbles in the dirt. That was a chore, though. Whoever got home to the home base first was the winner. You shoot that marbles, and that guy was close to that hole. You shoot him away, and that's the way you won the game.
Man, you had the strongest thumbs, I'm guessing?
No.
Oh, you didn't?
I wouldn't say I won all the time,
okay,
but I'll try to win.
So now, Jared, where are you working? And you don't have to give a specific name, but basically, what field are you working in right now? Mm-hmm. But more importantly, what are your career goals going forward? Where would you like to plateau in your career?
So right now, I currently work at a finance company in Corpus, and we do merchant cash advance and invoice factoring deals. And their advances, so it's a little different from more or less like a loan, for instance. So a merchant cash advance is it's going to be more expensive money, and you're essentially advancing somebody or purchasing their future receivables. It's not a loan. And it kind of gets around the loan aspect or loan.
Qualifying for loans and things of that nature too?
Correct.
Right.
So yeah, that's what I currently do. Now I see myself, I want to own my own business one day.
And I can see you doing that.
And I always kind of get in like a lot of different ideas or things. I don't know. I just like doing new things or trying new aspects.
Good.
I recently got into surfing, trying golfing as well. I mean, I'm always constantly looking for new things that are out there and kind of testing out, everything that there is.
That's good. You don't stop doing that.
Yeah.
Until you get to be about my age in the 50s, then you need to start pulling back a little bit. But don't stop doing that. That's always a good thing.
But also, don't tell me when it's a hurricane out there on the water that you're going surfing in the water either.
That's in the best ways are.
You worried the stars out of me.
So what Grandpa's referring to is that the
Yeah.
hurricane that just hit a few weeks back here in Corpus area was Hurricane Hannah. And Jared played a joke on Grandpa to tell him that he was going to go out surfing in the hurricane. So that's where that comes from Grandpa. But so Jared, is there anything else you want to bring to light regarding your career, your education, your marriage? Anything else that you'd like to tell us before we go on and end the episode?
No, not really. I mean, I look forward to being on the podcast. It's definitely pretty interesting, and I like seeing the previous podcasts with Grandpa. I definitely learned a lot of stuff that even stories that I have never heard before. And it really makes me appreciative of where I am in life, because I know without the dedication of my grandparents, my parents, my mom, my uncles, I definitely would never be in the position that I am today.
And it taught you one of the most important, I'm going to say one of the most important tools that you were going to need for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Not just in education, but hard work.
Yeah.
And you're very good at that.
What I wanted to say about that, you playing baseball, I watched every one of his high school games, and that boy was the best ball player on that whole team I ever saw. You could have probably made it in the pros, but I know your hip went out.
Yeah.
Well, it's one of those things that sets you up though for success because of the fact you realize, hey, I want to be a lot more competitive now going forward, and I think that's what sets you up for the next steps in your career.
Yeah.
And as competitive as you are, because you and Kyle are two of the most competitive men I've ever met, and you guys are definitely going to succeed. And I have no doubt y'all will achieve your goals.
Yeah.
You will achieve your goal, and you'll plateau out with your owning your own company, whether that's in finance, whether that's in technology, whatever it may be. There's no doubt that you will end up doing that. I have all the faith in the world. I know that's going to happen. So.
And what's funny too is I pick up, like, as I get older, in a sense, I pick up the little nuggets that you guys have kind of like left behind, and life lessons and whatnot there is, and I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense now.
Yep,
that makes sense.
So the information and you see it as you go along, because you just mentioned it. The information that myself and siblings and everybody we got from Grandpa and Grandma, it's paid off dividends for us nonstop. The information you're getting from your mom, from the uncles, and from Grandpa and Grandma are paying dividends now. Yeah. So you see how valuable it was. That's why we wanted to have a 3-generational perspective to see what is paying off now. And it definitely is. Yeah. So did you have any other questions for Jared, though? Anything else you wanted to tell us?
No, the only thing I wanted him to tell him is I'm glad he went from Android to iPhone.
An Android to an iPhone. Okay. All right. I'm glad he did that too. Jared, is there anything else that you want to add?
No, he's a wonderful man.
Absolutely.
Good young man, and I love him to death.
Absolutely.
Not only me, Grandma does too.
Yeah.
We all do. We all do. The whole family.
That's right. Outstanding.
Yeah.
So we're going to go on and end the episode, but Dad, is there anything else that you want to say?
Let me tell you something else.